Can we start? No, not yet. Can we start already?
Sean, can start already?
For you, start now.
Start now.
Live already.
Okay, okay.
Okay. Can you hear me? Sean, can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. We are live.
Okay, thank you. So welcome to our first MICCI Sabah branch webinar with the title of Relative and Tentative Recovery. This in collaboration with our partner Maybank for today's special session. Before I go any further, I just have a few wishes to wish all the Sabahan or Malaysian in Sabah here. We're going to celebrate our Merdeka Day in a few days' time for being independent within Malaysia for 58 years. And also our coming state election very soon. And we wish that everybody please vote wisely for the coming election. So without further ado, I would like to once again welcome all our participants for this morning. Thank you very much for coming to join us this very special webinar today. I would like also to thank you for especially our participants for this morning for tuning in through MICCI live stream and on Facebook. Special welcome to our distinguished panel speaker, Engineer Suhaimi Ilyas, Chief Economist of Maybank Investment Bank. And of course to our Mr. Sean Edward Chia, our Executive Director, is our moderator for this morning's session. Let me first introduce to you our Executive Director, Mr. Sean Chia. He has served the chamber as a member of our General Committee or GENCO, and later as Executive Director for the last 4 years. He is a chartered accountant by qualification from Australia. He had previously held CEO and COO posts in various organizations, including XC Telecom, Ericsson Malaysia, U Mobile, and Century Software. He is a keen military historian and also a technologist helping businesses in digital transformation. Before I hand over the session to Sean, I also wish you all to have a very fruitful session. I'm sure you have a lot of questions in your mind, especially in view of the current scenario economically in the country, especially in the state of Sabah. We, by any standard, always telling behind what's happening in Peninsular Malaysia. We wish that the speaker will highlight some of the issue in Sabah, and no doubt that this is a national view, but sometimes Sabah have very specific requirement, and the needs is quite different to many sectors when compared to those in Peninsular Malaysia. Although we are in one country, we wish that the divide between, the economic divide between the East Malaysian state like Sabah and Sarawak and Peninsular Malaysia need to look at very seriously, and hopefully that whatever national plan that is being planned for, the nation should be given some kind of special consideration in the case of Sabah and Sarawak to catch up. I use the word catch up with the rest of the Peninsular Malaysian state. Thank you. Without much ado, I would like to invite now Mr. Sean Chia to be our moderator for the session. Thank you, Sean.
Right. Hi. Thank you, Dato' Seri Panglima Wong Ken Tao. I just want to have a little bit brief background. Dato' Seri Panglima Wong is our MICCI, Malaysia International Chamber of Commerce and Industry Sabah chairperson, a very prominent personality in Sabah, and I think he has the record of serving under almost all the prime ministers that we have in Malaysia.
Can you hear? Second.
The video stop. Oh, yeah. On again.
Sorry, okay, some. Now the Maybank is speaking.
Hi, is everyone back in?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry, technical glitch at the moment. This is what some of the contentions that the international chamber has, and we've been telling the policymakers up in the federal capital about advancing to IR 4.0. Is our connectivity to the world is still very sketchy. Okay, so in order to have a progressive economy, we should have a very good IT and internet infrastructure. Okay, coming back to the topic of the day, I want to introduce with our esteemed speaker, Encik Suhaimi Ilyas. He's the chief economist for Maybank Maybank Investment Bank. Encik Suhaimi started his career with the Reserve Bank, Bank Negara, Economics Department way back in 1993. He joined Maybank Investment Bank in March of 2007. And over the years, economic research, he has been doing it for the last 15 years. He holds a Bachelor of Arts honors degree, economics, and a Master of Arts honors from Cambridge University. And in 2008, Encik Suhaimi was voted the best local economist in the Age Brokers poll and came up third in Asia Money's Brokers poll on local brokers for Malaysia macroeconomic research. All right, what is going to brief us today? Everyone has just come out from the restrictive MCO, and from the 4th of May, we have been actively reviving, rejuvenating our businesses, and we are hoping that the economy will be revive and rejuvenate to almost normal levels. So Encik Suhaimi will give us some insights on the good, the bad, or a bit on the uncertain part, so that business owners can then make informed decisions about what they should do going forward. And Encik Suhaimi is going to give us a little bit of a brief on a macro level on touching on the industries and the sectors that will benefit and be resilient under this new normal economy and the challenges that we're going to face. All right, so without further ado, before we go to Encik Suhaimi, a little bit introduction on Malaysian International Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We are a 183-year-old chamber, one of the oldest in Malaysia. We serve about 1,000 active members, and we have an ecosystem of about 23,000 associated companies. Most of our members are corporates with international investments or local companies with international businesses, right? So without further ado, Encik Suhaimi, are you ready? So I'll hand over the presentation to you. Encik Suhaimi?
Thank you, Sean. Let me start by wishing everyone well, and hopefully everybody are staying safe. Thank you to MICCI for inviting me to speak in today's session. What I want to do is do a quick presentation and basically share my presentation slide with you. I take the view that the sound quality is good and visual also is clear. Is that correct?
Yes, we hear you very well, Encik Suhaimi.
And the slides are visible, yeah?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So let me start by, I guess, stating the obvious first. We are in the recession, there's no denying that. And I think if you look at this particular slide that looks at the state of the global economy on quarterly basis up to last quarter, second quarter 2020, we have quite a lot of numbers for second quarter 2020 coming in already for the major advanced economies, for the large emerging economies like China, India, and the regional countries as well. On the basis of the numbers that we have so far, we estimated that the global economy shrank 10% on a year-to-year basis. So that's 5 times worse than our estimate of a 2% contraction in the first quarter of the year. Not really surprising, because I think second quarter is the period when the lockdown is in full swing for literally the world. But you will notice from this slide, there's one interesting exception. That is China. China economy actually rebounded last quarter, registering a growth of slightly over 3%, compared with a decline in GDP of almost 7%. I think China basically displayed a unique situation of what I call first in, first out. So they are the first into pandemic. Obviously, pandemic started, COVID-19 pandemic started there in Wuhan. And they are the first also to go into lockdown. The lockdown period in China is between 23rd January until 8th of April. So the bulk of lockdown in China happened in first quarter. So after 8 April, they reopened the economy as COVID-19 cases there dissipated. But for the rest of the world, we are all implementing lockdown, mostly during second quarter of the year. Because of that, you can see the very visible impact to the economy in an effort to contain the COVID-19 pandemic, to flatten the pandemic curve. Unfortunately, we worsened the recession curve. But the good thing to note is that we are seeing evidence that economic activities are improving. And I think the reason for this is actually starting from middle of May onwards. Countries around the world are starting to roll back their lockdown. They start to ease their lockdown. So this has the effect of lifting mobility and economic indicators of the lockdown lows in April. So in this chart, if I can spend a bit of time describing it, the dotted red line is the Oxford COVID-19 Government Response Tracker Stringency Index. It's a measure of the degree or severity of lockdown. So obviously things were really bad. In April, the index was almost 80, but by August, July, August, it's a drop to 60. So I mean, there is an easing in lockdown, and the implication, one of the immediate implication of easing lockdown is improved mobility. The black line there that shows you the global average of Apple Mobility Index. This is essentially based on the usage of apps in your Apple phone to move around. So they track this, and what we are seeing is there is an improvement in mobility. At the same time, the easing or rollback of lockdown has resulted in the reopening and the restarting of businesses and industries. They also restore supply chains. There's also pent-up demand and spending occurring in the economy. And because of that, a particular measure of global economic activity, the Global Composite Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI, which gauge or measure activities in manufacturing and services worldwide. The yellow line there has improved from the low in April and gradually start to pick up as per the latest data in July. And the interesting about Global Composite PMI is that, as you can see from this slide or this chart, it is very correlated with our estimate, our calculation of global GDP. So not surprisingly, second quarter was bad, but July numbers suggest that the economy is on the mend following the lifting of mobility and economic indicators with the rolling back of lockdown. And I think you can also see that in the case of Malaysia. And here we are looking at Google Community Mobility Index. You can see how mobility dropped sharply during MCO period, but started to improve gradually as we move from MCO to conditional MCO or CMCO, and further improvement was recorded during the recovery MCO, RMCO, such that the drop in mobility compared with the immediate pre-COVID-19 level is only 10%, whereas during the MCO, mobility in the economy was down by as much as 50%. And the Google Community Mobility Index is actually a composite of several mobility in several areas. So when we pick one particular sub-index of global Google Community Mobility Index for retail and recreation venues, these also have shown that kind of a V-shaped-ish recovery. And we plot this again, retail trade volume index, a measure of consumer spending in the economy. There is an indication of improvement in consumer spending. Improvement in the relative sense, as in it is still down on a year-to-year basis, or is still down from the pre-COVID-19, immediate pre-COVID-19 period in January and February, but it is less severe than what we experienced during April 2020. So things are in a way improving in that sense. Similarly, when we pick one particular sub-index of the Google Community Mobility Index for workplaces and plot that against number of unemployed and number of employment in the economy, we are seeing the rise in unemployment, the loss of jobs seems to be stabilizing. More and more people are going back to workplaces now as mobility at workplaces increase. And I think this is a very important thing to highlight also, because actually in April, when MCA was in full swing, there were something like 4.9 million workers who actually cannot work because they were constrained by the ability to perform their work remotely or at home because of the nature of the job, maybe made worse also by what Sean said earlier about the quality of our internet infrastructure. But as we move from MCO to CMCO in May, this number dropped to around 2 million. And encouragingly, in June, as we go into RMCO, more people are back to work. Only something like 800 to 900,000 people are still not back at work. And I think the relative improvement in the economy are also being seen in manufacturing sectors. Here, we take Malaysia's own manufacturing PMI and plot it against manufacturing activities indicators like production and exports, you can also see very clearly we have basically bounced off the lockdown lows in April. These further indicators, business registrations in terms of sole proprietors, the numbers also normalizing in June and July after the slump in April, and that was followed by some sort of a beginning of a recovery in May. Ultimately, I think the best indicator is your GDP. Department of Statistics actually come up with a monthly GDP growth for the period Jan to June 2020. Again, you can see the impact of lockdown, the impact of MCO, and the improvement following the transition from MCO to CMCO and RMCO. So in January, February, the economy is growing average about 4.3%. In March, as we go into MCO 18 of March, economy shrank almost 6%. April was terrible, the economy down by almost 30%. But since May, there has been a relative improvement. The rate of decline in the economy lessened to just under 20% in May, and actually improved quite a fair bit by declining by just 3% in June as a result of rolling back the lockdowns. I think what does it all mean in terms of Malaysia's and global economic performance this year and next year? Is a given already. This year is recession, but next year we are pricing in recovery. So global economy, after a 6% decline in first half, is expected to drop by 5% this year, expected to improve by slightly above 5.3%. In the case of Malaysia, as the result of the 8.3% decline in GDP in the first half, we are expecting the economy to shrink by 5.4% this year, but will recover by 5.1% next year. But I think that maybe the uncertain bit about this narrative is that the recession to recovery path, I think, remains uncertain, remains challenging. This is an interesting survey by Bank of America. Every month they do it. They ask global fund managers, what is your thought or your view on global recession recovery path? And they've started this particular question in the survey since April. The latest survey result is as of this month. You can see on average, around 70% of global fund managers are looking at U or W-shaped recovery, meaning to say they are really looking more of an environment of slow or uneven recovery, rather than in particular the V-shaped recovery that we are so used to in the past, as we can see based on our experience during 1998, Asian financial crisis, and 2008 global financial crisis, where we had a pretty quick rebound after recession. And I think the reason for this is generally economic outlook is sensitive to what I call the kinetic of COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the related policies and developments. So for example, if you look at this slide, this is a global risk survey by Oxford Economics, comparing what were the responses by businesses in second quarter compared with first quarter. So you can see the blue bar there that refers to first quarter view of things. Everybody was so concerned in particular about US-China trade tension re-escalating, getting worse, and so on for the next 2 years. But come second quarter, as COVID-19 become the sort of a theme, you can see the concerns about trade tension, geopolitics, Brexit, whatever is gone, disappear. But now everybody is more or less concerned about the implication of COVID-19 in terms of renewed wave of infections, whether or not lockdown is going to be around for longer, whether or not this would trigger deeper recession, so on and so forth. So the worries generally of business is on COVID-19 pandemic and the economic implication. And I think this is not surprising, because there is a trade-off actually when we eased lockdown. As you can see, up to April, the yellow line that represents the stringency index, lockdown is being imposed to basically curb the rise in COVID-19 daily cases globally, the black line there. But I think because of the economic pain of lockdown, governments around the world have to decide that we need to basically ease the lockdown to save livelihoods as much as we want to also save lives. But the flip side of this is we are seeing the global COVID-19 daily cases remain on the uptrend. And right now, I think we are having something like more than 250,000 cases daily. So this is the concern, meaning to say COVID-19 pandemic is still with us. We have no idea how long this is going to last. But I think to mitigate the impact on the economy, what I want to say is that we will not go back to the kind of lockdown that we had in the second quarter, that very hard lockdown where we are shutting down businesses, industries, limiting people, like literally banning movement of people. So I think that's not likely to happen. What we are seeing already is that a more of a targeted, localized lockdown in areas where there are spike in cases, rather than that broad national lockdown. So I think that's the key thing that we have to bear in mind. I don't see that happening because obviously if you go back to the broad nationwide lockdown, that would be damaging to the economy. And I think at the same time, the government is obviously urging people to basically observe, comply with the various public health measures and safety protocols, SOPs, and so on. So that's why, for example, the Oxford COVID-19 government response tracker indices on things like public campaigns still high up there. As you know, right now, governments around the world are also urging people to, for example, wear masks, observe personal hygiene, businesses, industry to focus also regularly in terms of sanitizing and so on. And I think also there is a ramp up in the capabilities and capacities to do tests for COVID-19 as well as contact tracing. The other aspect of COVID-19 pandemic is the implication of policies. And I think to highlight, to give an example of this, we can look at this slide in terms of international tourist arrivals. United Nations World Tourism Organization actually forecasting a very severe drop in international tourist arrival this year, anywhere between 58% to 78% drop, plunge. This compares with just 4% drop during global economic crisis in 2009 and during the SARS outbreak, just a mere 0.4% drop. Why you have this situation is because the international tourist industry is severely affected by the international border controls, as well as bans or restriction on travels, international travel. So the trajectory of recovery or industries as far as international tourist arrival is concerned, just for this year alone, really depend on how soon can we open international border, how soon can we lift travel restrictions. The sooner the better, but obviously the later this can be done, as indicated by these scenarios by United Nations World Trade Organization, the longer it will take for the industry to recover. Obviously, as I said, the kinetic of COVID-19 pandemic is critical in terms of economic outlook. In the case of the global real GDP scenario by the likes of International Monetary Funds, IMF, by World Bank, by OECD, the baseline is consistent. Everybody is expecting recession this year, followed by recovery next year. I think the key assumption here is COVID-19 pandemic will be contained later this year. The upside is actually a scenario where the COVID-19 pandemic can be contained around summertime, around now. But obviously that's not going to be the case. So I guess we can forget about the upside. But we do worry about the worst case scenario, as in, could there be another round of new waves of COVID-19 infections later this year or early 2021? If that is the case, we're going to have a potential deeper recession this year and more muted or delayed recovery in 2021. So I think as far as outlook is concerned, still subject to high degree of risk and uncertainties. I think the other concerns is what we call scarring effect, the more long-lasting permanent impact of COVID-19 on the economy. We may have a situation where some industries, some businesses will struggle to recover. Relating or going back to the example that I gave earlier about the challenging outlook for tourism industry, international tourism industry, I think these have a knock-on effect on especially aviation industry, the airlines industry. You can see from here statistics on global scheduled flights every week on a year-to-year basis. It's still down 50%. compared with a year ago. As of this month, it was as bad as 70% drop during the peak period of lockdown. Most of the flights that have happened right now is more domestic flight. International flights are very restricted. And I think there's also a knock-on effect on industry that also depends on tourist spending, like F&B. And this stats shows you the statistic on global restaurants and diners open. Still kind of a very slow recovery. Hence the earlier survey result that shows why people are looking at more of a U-shape or even W-shape recovery rather than V-shape recovery that we are accustomed to in the past. The risk from businesses and industries struggling to recover is that there may be a risk of there going to be surge in insolvencies and bankruptcies. So I think right now, the reason why we are probably not seeing or hearing much in terms of insolvencies and bankruptcies is because there's a lot of financial and fiscal reliefs being given by governments, by the central banks for businesses, including stuff like loan moratoriums, wage subsidies, tax deferral, so on and so forth. So there is that concern. Once all this one-off, time-bound financial and fiscal reliefs ended, would we see this kind of thing, sudden surge in insolvencies and bankruptcies? The concern also of insolvencies and bankruptcies is because we entered the pandemic crisis at a with very high level of debts, especially in the corporate sector. And if you look at this chart, even since 1998 or after 1998 Asia financial crisis, there's no end to borrowing really. We continue to borrow and borrow. Of course, it is needed to grow, to do capex and so on, but there's always concern the degree of the recession get worse as you enter recession with even higher level of debt. I think the other concern is job losses, the extent of job losses. How bad is it going to be? And I think this projection or scenarios by International Labour Organization, in an upside scenario, the kind of job losses that are going to be experienced this year compared with 2009 is not that much or that big. But the baseline is 140 million people worldwide going to lose job. But in the worst case scenario, the number of job losses can be very severe relative to the actual during 2009 global financial crisis. I think within the context of ASEAN, within the context of Malaysia, I think that the worry about job losses is rooted on certain issues. For example, contribution of tourism to the economy and employment is high in the region, including for Malaysia. And I think there's also this particularly vulnerable segment of our workforce, those people who are self-employed, including those who work in the gig economy, like the e-hailing drivers, as well as people who are working in the family businesses, the small or micro enterprises. And for some countries, particularly the likes of Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, I think the main worries about job losses is they have a lot of their citizens working abroad as foreign labor elsewhere. And the economy depends on remittances by these people. So obviously, if you're going to have protectionism, you're going to have border control, if you want to have this kind of situation that resulted in a low employment of foreign nationals in the countries, that can hurt the economies that are dependent on the remittances. This is not that big an issue for Malaysia though. So because of this, I think generally the outlook next 2 years, this year, next year, unemployment rate would in general be larger or higher than what we have before COVID-19, looking at 2018, 2019 numbers, relatively speaking. We also estimate how bad can job losses be for ASEAN 6 countries, almost 25 million, about 9% of workforce. For Malaysia, right now the number of unemployed people are around 700 or less than 100,000, but the job losses can be as high as 1 million based on our estimate in the worst case scenario. I think you would also notice of late there's been a lot of talk about vaccines, and I think vaccines are very important wildcards for the outlook on the economy. It can delay or it can speed up transition from recession to recovery. I think right now we have Straf We are clawing our way out of that trough, so in this kind of a recovery process. But full recovery in the economy, I think, would very much dependent on how soon can we have the availability of safe and effective vaccines. The sooner, the better. So I think right now there is a race to basically develop vaccine. I think in total there's something like 116 vaccine candidates out there, but only 6 are at the clinical trial stage 3, which is a very important stage because this is where the testing is done on large number of people at the time when the pandemic is still active, because you want to test the effectiveness of the vaccine in terms of providing immunity to the body, as well as to make sure that the vaccines are also safe with no or minor side effects. Only 6. So this is an important stage, stage 3, before licensing and approval for manufacturing and distribution of doses. So if we see more and more vaccines go into clinical trial stage 3, I think that would also help in terms of giving us a greater degree of confidence that we're going to have vaccine soon. I think the other things to highlight in terms of risk and wildcard, global external uncertainties still high. And in fact, right now, there is a worry that US-China trade tension is re-escalating again. And it's not just about trade tension anymore. You can sense that the tension between US and China has broadened into many other areas. Things like technology, with all these TikTok issues, Huawei, WeChat, so on and so forth. I think the worry is we are going to the next level of US-China trade tensions. I think this is something that we need to bear in mind, because in 2018 and 2019, we have US-China trade war. What happened is global economic growth slows down. So at the time when we are still facing the challenges and uncertainties of pandemic crisis, but if you have US-China quarreling into more areas beyond trade, it can complicate our recovery process. And I think that concern about re-escalation of US-China tension has resulted in a situation where gold price has gone up a lot. I think it's like $2,000 per ton now. It's more expensive than copper price, which is an important industrial metal, suggesting that there's a lot of money flowing into gold for safe haven or hedging purpose in an environment of elevated uncertainty. And I think Datuk Seri Panglima also earlier talked about this animal called domestic politics. I think I don't want to go too much into this, but I guess the domestic political situation, I guess, does adds to elements of risk or wildcards. And right now, everybody is talking about national or snap election, but of course, Sabah and Sarawak going into a state election as well. What are the policy implications from the kind of environment that we are in? I think first and foremost, the monetary policy stimulus will stay for an extended period of time. I think globally, central bank interest rate is at record low now, including Malaysia. Our overnight policy rate of 1.75% is even lower than the level during the global financial crisis in 2008-2009, when it was at 2%. So we are expecting central bank to keep interest rate low even into next year. And I think there's also the issue of economic stimulus. I think from this chart, we actually compile the economic stimulus described as a percentage of GDP, look at not just direct fiscal injections, but also at the relief, soft loans, guarantees, and so on. This time around, for this group of countries, the amount of economic stimulus is far larger than what was announced during the global financial crisis in 2008-2009. It's almost 15% compared with just under 6% back then. And Malaysia actually have one of the largest economic stimulus package globally at almost 20% of GDP. Just want to share some highlights or on status of Malaysia's economic stimulus package. These are the key measures under the 265 billion Prihatin package. A lot of things are being rolled out, being implemented, and the more recent Penjana 35 billion ringgit package is also being implemented. So I think in summary, more than 90% of the 14 billion ringgit allocated for various one-off cash handouts has been disbursed, and over 50% of other more like time-bound measures like loan moratorium, wage subsidies, EPF measures, electricity bill discount have been implemented. And I think this is a very important thing to highlight as well, because I think in an environment of political situation that we are in, I think the great thing about the country is that the political situation does not affect the policy making process and policy implementation. Meaning to say the likes of Bank Negara, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Health, the ability to implement economic stimulus policy, the public health policies are not impaired because of the political situation. I think in many other countries, when the politics is all over the place, policy making and policy implementation is suffered. So I think this is a very important point to highlight. I think with the situation that we are in, we can expect the government to maintain economic stimulus, and this is reflected in terms of budget deficit or deficit spending by the government will remain, obviously this year will go up a lot, but will remain elevated next year compared with the kind of deficit spending by most of the ASEAN 6 government in the pre-COVID years of 2017 to 2019. And as far as Malaysia is concerned, the policy support will continue. As you know, I think, and probably you have heard, Malaysia adopted a 6R strategy in dealing with COVID-19 impact, as well as the implication to the economy. We are at recovery stage now. The latest measures announced was the targeted extension of loan moratorium and flexible loan repayment plans on the end of July. We are moving into the revitalized and reform stage of the 6R strategy. This is more medium to long term, will include medium to long term economic recovery plan, which I was made to understand will be announced in October to follow up on Penjana, which is actually more of a short term second half 2020 economic recovery plan. Budget 2021 will be tabled on 6 November. And in the first quarter of next year, we'll have the 12th Malaysia plan, which obviously was delayed. Originally, it was supposed to be announced this month, but because of the COVID-19, the government have to relook at the 12th Malaysia plan for the next 5 years. I think as far as COVID-19 impact on businesses, what are the challenges, what are the responses and the policy support, I would say in general, the key impact challenges on businesses are in 5 areas. First is financial. I don't think I need to go into details. You guys run business, you would see decline in revenues, delays in receivables, cash flow and liquidity challenges. I think the action has been largely in terms of looking at ways how to cut cost where you can. Also to focus on restoring financial strength and resilience in terms of cash reserve, cash flow management, debt restructuring, reprioritizing spending and capex, as well as drawing down on credit facilities for working capital. And there is policy support by the government. As I mentioned earlier, loan moratorium were implemented. It was extended on targeted basis for those who are not qualified for loan moratorium under the new targeted basis. There is a flexible debt repayment plan with banks. You can tap onto the wage subsidies. There's all these EPF and tax payment deferrals and exemptions, soft loans schemes and grants. So a lot of help there. You also face challenges and impact in terms of customer, the fall in demand because some job losses, lower income, uncertainties, customers going online when they do their purchases and shopping. They downtrade. I mean, they focus more on savings, discount, cheaper products. So I believe the actions and responses taken would have included communicating and engaging with customers, adapting technology and digitalization, particularly e-commerce. And I think from the government perspective, there are measures to stimulate demand. As I said, there has been interest rate cuts. The government also provided targeted financial assistance to households and individuals, plus all the tax incentive to spur consumer spending. Technology, I think, is another key impact, particularly in terms of communication and connectivity. We have to adapt to new normal in terms of working, doing business, in terms of our operating environment, going online, more digitalization. We are in a more low-touch, contactless economy. We need to upgrade technologies and systems. So I think the policy support are there in terms of providing tax incentive, funding and grants for technology investment, digitalization and automation. And I think the government made the right call to basically engage in this huge capex for National Fiberization and Connectivity Plan, NFCP, that actually was rolled out, started last year. This is something like 25 billion investment to improve our digital technology infrastructure in terms of bandwidth, in terms of network speed, so on and so forth, involving the government as well as the telcos. I think another big impact or challenges arising from COVID-19 is on supply chain. Again, I'm quite sure a lot of you had to communicate, engage, even renegotiate with suppliers and vendors. You also have to look into supply chain security and resilience by diversifying, looking for alternatives, even adopting localization for your supply chain. Last but not least, I think we have to empathize also in terms of the impact on people. COVID-19 resulted in a fair amount of human costs for people, I think, concerned about job security, about the safety and health, not to mention productivity. So I think there's a lot of policy support on this as well, in terms of wage subsidies to retain jobs. The government is also providing incentive for businesses to hire and train workers as well. I think from the perspective of the outlook for selected industry sectors, I would say the kind of sectors that are going to benefit from or resilient to COVID-19 pandemic and new normal would be technology, healthcare related, including rubber gloves, power, telecommunication, eventually F&B. Of course, the challenges are big for the likes of oil and gas, wholesale and retail, aviation, but we do see light at the end of a tunnel to some extent for construction, property and automotive, because these sectors are being provided with support in terms of fiscal and economic stimulus, where we have a resumption of major infrastructure projects, also tax incentive, for example, to boost property sales as well as auto sales. If I were to give my 2 cents in terms of what are the key growth areas in the post-pandemic economy, I think needless to say healthcare related would be one of it, but I'm referring more to beyond the rubber glove, the face masks, face shields, PPE, sanitary and hygienic products. We're talking about we need to consider the higher value added stuff like medical devices, pharmaceutical, clinical testing, labs, diagnostic, telemedicine, care and recovery services, life science, wellness. I think there's also angle for tourism, given the challenges like medical tourism. Technology and telco, of course, will be important. One aspect of technology and telco, I think, will be cybersecurity as everybody go digital and tech. I think domestic tourism definitely very important now. I mean, uncertainties over border controls and implication to international and inbound tourism, because I think people now would do more short trips, engage in more staycations. I think food is an important industry to focus on, particularly from a perspective of food security, our self-sufficiency, import substitution. It also can create jobs and generate income through agro and food businesses and entrepreneurship. There's also spillover like agro tourism. And I would say also going forward, when it comes to capex for business, I don't expect businesses to go expand your capacity right now because the outlook is still uncertain. But alongside technology and digitalization, perhaps another angle of investment or capex that you can do is to focus on more of the sustainable and green investment. Maybe for energy, you look into whether or not you can on your own respective industries or businesses to engage or make use of solar or biomass. And I think there is also the opportunities to green the brown and brownfield assets. Last but not least, I think financial management and planning is important. I've mentioned earlier about how one of the biggest impact of COVID-19 on us is on financial. I think from a perspective of individuals and businesses, there is a need to build financial resilience, financial security through private safety nets to complement the social safety nets. I think one of the things that is exposed from COVID-19 is that we don't have a lot of people, a lot of businesses don't have inadequate buffers in terms of cash saving, cash reserves. So I think the other interesting development that we are seeing is that there is things happening in terms of relocation for supply chain and for supply chain resilience and securities. I think during the course of 2018-2019, as a result of US-China trade war, a lot of US companies and China companies are actually relocate out of their respective countries to third country, and one of the major beneficiaries is actually ASEAN economies, because they want to bypass the tariff that are imposed by China and US on each other. So if you produce in China, export to US or vice versa, a lot of product has been subjected to higher tariff. But if you, let's say, relocate or diversify your supply chain to third country that are not affected by tariff, and you can bypass. So now what is also interesting, as a result of COVID-19, we are seeing even companies from the like of Japanese firms, they are actually looking to diversify their supply chain. In particular, in these instances for this slide, the Japan External Trade Organization, or JETRO, is actually providing subsidies for Japanese firms to relocate from China under the overseas supply chain diversification product. Major beneficiary seems to be Vietnam. Out of the first list of 30 plus companies, 15 are going to Vietnam in E&E, healthcare related and other sectors. Malaysia also is one of the beneficiaries as well, mostly in healthcare related. I think last but not least, digitalization, online transaction is going to be the norm. This is just sharing what we see at Maybank in terms of digital transactions through multiple e-platforms and applications, in terms of the search in the usage of Maybank to You, the mobile app, and QR Pay. I think I'll stop here, hand over to Sean, and maybe after this we focus more on Q&A. I'll give more time for Q&A session. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Encik Sulaiman. That's very insightful. Some of the points that I picked up here is the discussion on the V or U or extended curve, right? The MICCI is one of the forerunners in advising the government to quickly open the economy. And what we wanted to see was what you have shown, that there's quite significant V-shaped bounce back. So is that a vindication of the early resumption of economic activities, that there is no, in your opinion, long-term scarring, as what you were saying about if we have left the opening of the economy a bit longer, would you, in your opinion, see that there will be scarring? I mean, some businesses that had to shut and we can't rejuvenate.
Yeah, I think what is encouraging is the data seems to suggest we are on the onset of a V-shaped recovery. I think it's largely because of the rolling back of lockdown, reopening of industries and business, but also I think there are some pent-up supply and demand going on because that was disrupted. But again, I think pent-up demand supply is not a sustainable basis for growth.
Yes.
You just have this kind of surge, short-term surge. So I think the challenge going forward is how to sustain this recovery. I think we have to be mindful of the risk that the COVID-19 pandemic itself, the kinetic of it is such that it can last longer than what we are pricing in at the moment. I mean, at the moment, the kind of recession this year, recovery next year scenario is based critically on the assumption that the COVID-19 pandemic will be contained by the end of this year. Now, when I say contained, it's not like suddenly the daily case of COVID-19 just goes zero worldwide. No, but the curve is flattened. I think that is very important. I think I've shown that chart about the daily 7-day moving average of COVID-19 cases globally. It's not flattened, it's just plateaued and then go up again. So right now we are hoping and praying for that curve to be flattened. We have not really flattened the curve yet. But even if we may not be successful in flattening the curve, there will still be cases. We do expect the cases, we hope the cases will be less than 250,000 cases daily globally now. But we also hope next year we'll have better news in terms of vaccine. So at the very least, when we have vaccine, and this is available, it's safe, it's effective, and widely available at affordable cost, I think that can actually help to boost consumers and business confidence, because right now that uncertainty causes some degree of pullback and can create that longer recovery stages. The other things about scarring effect, I think this is the unknown right now. As I said, maybe the numbers right now is being suppressed because there's a lot of assistance being given. The kind of assistance that we get now is nothing that we have ever seen before. I mean, you never thought there would be a loan moratorium. You never thought government would give wage subsidies. You never thought government give you exemptions or deferrals on your tax payment. You never thought that, you know, you don't have to pay your EPF. At least the businesses can. I mean, these are the kind of. But we must bear in mind, these assistance are one-off. They are time-bound. So there's always the worry. Just as we are getting questioned, will the NPL rise because of the end of loan moratorium this September? So I think to manage that, they provide extension of the loan moratorium for qualified people and businesses subject to the conditions to manage it. Even then, I think there are people who are able to actually service their loan. So between April and June, we noticed the number of people who opt out from loan moratorium actually increased from 200,000 to 600,000. So at least I think the thing right now is to mitigate the impact, we have to stay keep in conversation with all the stakeholders. For businesses, I guess keep yourself engaged with customers, suppliers, vendors, and so on, with the banks, and also I guess through association like MICCI, engage with the government regularly, so that the government fully apprised of the real situation on the ground, and then can do the necessary adjustment in policies, because I think the policy process itself will be very dynamic. But I think it will be inevitable. There will be some permanent job losses. There will be permanent closures of business, particularly at the micro SME level. So I think maybe the critical policy going forward would be like retraining, reskilling, upskilling of people who experience job losses for I think the businesses that folded and so on. I do feel that one key challenges for us is maybe our bankruptcy law insolvency process is I guess maybe a bit too lopsided, favoring more creditors than borrowers. I think that's probably one key area that need to be reviewed, because the government cannot be the one that drive the economy permanently. It's always the private sectors. So I think if we have an environment and ecosystem where the process of insolvency is not painful, bankruptcy doesn't carry with it stigma, like in America, in Europe, for example, you are celebrated if you go bankrupt, because you know, like here is like, oh, such a bad thing, such a bad deal, and that I think curb the entrepreneurship can be a big damage to entrepreneurship spirit as a result of COVID-19. So I think we need. That's why I said I think the government is right in pursuing the CSR strategy. The last two R are revive and reform. So I think reform is very important.
Right. Okay, yeah, you're right. We Malaysia, to be looking at the micros part of the world, that we have survived through the several pandemics, especially like SARS and the avian flu, and from presentation by the Reserve Bank some months ago that previous history shows that Malaysia has been able to do a fairly good V-shaped rebound. And from what you present, yes, a likelihood that there may be a V-shape, but it's not really a V-shape, would probably be a narrow U, right? You would take, okay? So in terms of that, for example, the two largest economy, China and the US, they never really shut down their economy. China, large enough in geography, they never shut the whole nation like what we did. So they have a better chance of recovery. So if the two, like they say, if US sneezes, everyone has a cold. I think in confidence to business owners out there, it's not doom and gloom in what we're trying to encourage government to open earlier, was that the COVID-19 is here to stay. It's nothing that at the end of the year suddenly disappears. And I think from looking at the V-shaped recovery that you have shown, yes, even though it is maybe could be artificial based on the moratorium and the handouts, it showed that people has accepted that it is part of life and COVID-19 will never go away, and there will be subsequent ones like that in future, right? So the worry we have here is the R&R, the last part, the revitalize and reform. Malaysia, as you have pointed out, is one of the largest economic stimulus packages that is offered. So I'm just wondering, what would you think would be the long-term issues? Would there be any long-term issues? You know, do we have the fiscal resources to sustain this program of revitalize and reform? Then would it be this cliff that falls right down at the end of the so-called tunnel? What do you think? Do we think that the Malaysian economy or the treasury has the fiscal resources to sort of sustain our getting out of this pandemic?
I think there's constraint. We have to accept that we don't have the privilege of, let's say, US, whose currency is a global international reserve currency, premier currency for settlement of trade, investment, so on and so forth. So it's easy for them to print money because the money tend to be in demand. It's not like if we print tons of ringgit, everybody is rushing through the door to buy ringgit and own ringgit, right? So I think there is a constraint from the perspective of a very aggressive stimulus that involve a lot of money printing to finance government deficit spending. So we have to acknowledge that. So I guess we have to be more targeted and more smart about how we provide economic stimulus going forward. So I think that's why the government is focusing more on medium to long-term measures now, no more of these firefighting type of measures. You can sense the policy measures to react to the impact of COVID is becoming more targeted, just like the loan moratorium, even the wage subsidies, although it was extended and expanded, you notice also the expansion also include higher level or higher degree of assistance for hard hit sectors like tourism and those that cannot operate normally or will be slow to recover. So these are the kind of steps that I think the government would look at, particularly under budget 2021. You may even see a situation where wage subsidies can be extended, not necessarily expanded, because there's 19 billion allocated. So far, you only use 9 billion. So you can roll over that. Why not? Because I think there could be a situation where certain industry that struggling to recover takes time, will still need that kind of assistance. So we'll narrow it down from that blanket kind of assistance to more targeted. I think that's what's going to happen. But over the longer term, we do need to have more strategic policies. So look at, identify which are the industries that we think will ride out COVID-19 pandemic, and we can be good at it, do well, attract foreign direct investment, because I think there is an opportunity in terms of the relocation angle, but we've got to make sure when those guys come in, maybe MICCI and MIDA can collaborate and look at how can the local players support the MNC that come here in terms of the supply chain, because I think one aspect of relocation to build resilience and security of supply chain is localization. You got to make sure you have the supply, because I think if you do depend on imports and all that, there is always the risk. So I think these are interesting things that the government need to look at. So your incentive for investment have to be tailor-made more and more towards this. Naturally, I think you correctly mentioned about how we need to move onto Industrial 4.0 revolution and so on. But I think this would involve engagement by everyone. I think CAPEX, like I said, you can't expect people to increase capacity right now. I mean, probably not even sensible. But the kind of investment that's probably needed going forward is clear-cut. The digitalization, the automation, greater use of technology. Because if you look at our SMEs, my understanding is that probably not more than 20% of our SMEs are really adopting technology aggressively. And probably the SMEs that do this are those that are in the supply chain of the MNCs. Whereas the more local-based SME, probably less so. But again, I think the businessmen themselves, the industries would know what degree of technological adoption, digitalization, automation that you need. You have to understand that also. Then it's not just a broad brush of everybody just go technology, but what? I mean, I'm sure that it's different. For customer-facing in businesses, I think the kind of technology will be more digitalization, because to facilitate online transaction, payment, settlement, fulfillment, and so on. It's not like manufacturing. Perhaps the degree of technology adoption is perhaps deeper. So I think there is a lot more sort of in-depth kind of understanding of the situation before we can come up with a good policy. But certainly, in terms of government room to stimulate the economy, it's not perpetual. There are limits. As you know, the government going to incur budget deficit that is at least as high as what it was during 2008 crisis. More than 6% of GDP. But the government also have made a commitment, expressed a commitment to bring down the deficit to 4% in 4 years' time. So that means you already know the government is kind of constrained from that perspective. So they have to be very targeted in terms of stimulus. I think the other challenges is the government need to also diversify the revenue. I mean, obviously, we abolish GST, we go back to narrow-based SST, there are implications to government revenues. And don't expect crude oil price to go back to $100 per barrel. I don't see that ever. So I think that will have an implication in terms of government revenues. So they do need to look at diversifying and broadening the revenue base. That might impose some challenge as well for businesses. I do not know whether we're going to bring back GST or whether the SST itself would be broadened, deepened in such a way that in the end it doesn't look that much different from the GST, for example. There might be new taxes. I don't know, but you might want. We may have to be mindful of this. But I think on the part of government, they also need to be more efficient in terms of spending, less leakages and so on. So that will also be helpful. I think the other thing to watch in terms of cost in particular, I think minimum wage will have to go up. Why I say this is because our poverty line income has been revised from 980 to I think just over 2,000. When poverty line income was 980,000, we saw what happened. Our minimum wage was basically currently it's at 1,001, 1,002. So it doesn't make sense for minimum wage to be lower than poverty line income. So over time, I think that's one area that business have to think about in terms of implication. Because I think generally the government also wants the economy to be more of a high income economy. not so much just high profits, but also high income, as in for the people. When people have more income, their spending power improve. We keep hearing about cost of living issues, affordability, so on and so forth. So this can only best address through increase in wage and income.
Okay. Hey, thanks. Good message that you have brought back in. Yes, it's heartening to hear and to see that at least the government is husbanding and to be more targeted in what they hand out rather than the shotgun approach that they had the last time. Okay, so it's good that the damage is not so severe. Okay, yes, maybe GST, something you can think about. I think as an economist and to us, we understand that GST is a much fairer tax. I mean, as long as we don't have a lot of exemptions to it, it works. Okay, and but it may be a political setback, so to speak, but there is some ideas that has been mooted that they bring it in, and it's not that really bad in the way that a lot of the businesses still had their GST systems in place and stuff like that that can easily be revived when there's need to. Coming back to, there's a very, what they call the elephant in the room, that many of the SMEs and a lot of our members are asking that, in your viewpoint, even as the economist for the bank, in investment bank, though, that there is uncertainty in the next few quarters. Would that cause banks or financial institutions to sort of evaluate the risk profile and maybe rein in some credits and stuff like that? Even though, yes, you say that you will help. I mean, it's true. Survival of your borrowers also ensures survival of your banks, right? But you have to realize that banks are also a profit organization. So give us a bit of an insight on whether there would be some tightening of your credit policies going forward.
Well, I'm not going to sugarcoat this topic. I think the banks have to be mindful of the implication that perhaps not yet emerged because of loan moratoriums and the extension. But I think you can see from the perspective of banks are actually raising the provisioning for bad credits, for NPLs, whenever they announce their quarterly result. All the banks that are listed, you keep hearing the provision has increased. So there will be some, I would say, a more cautious approach by banks in terms of lending out. But I would say it would probably be targeted to, I think the keyword is always targeted kind of thing. And I think similarly in terms of credit standards by banks, I think they would be more targeted in terms of where they can still lend and where they will be a bit more cautious. I think the quality of borrowers would be very important. So I think that's where it is important for businesses to focus also on rebuilding the financial strength right now to ease the case of getting credit. But at the same time, in my opinion, even if the banking system in itself is perhaps less willing, perhaps to provide credit, we have alternatives. In the sense of we have development financial institutions, the Bank Pembangunan, the SME banks, the agro bank of the world, that I think will be there to provide assistance as well. And I would say Bank Negara itself this time around is a little bit more visible in the market in terms of providing credit themselves. Of course, they do it through the banking system because by Act of Central Bank Act, they cannot give loan direct to borrowers, but they do it through the banking system because the banking system have the monitoring, the branches, operation and all that to do this. So I would say it's not going to be like a total tightening of credit standard across the board. It will be selective, but I think we may also see part of the package to revive the economy over medium to longer term one area of extension in policies, I think is you're going to see the central bank maybe extending, even expanding the current facilities that they have. For example, the SRF, I think for SMEs by Bank Negara, 10 billion, it's already fully used up. It was actually doubled from 5 billion to 10 billion. Very strong response. And the banks also obviously quite happy to extend that because it's kind of give you a good spread, you know, to get very low or zero interest rate, and then they can land it out at 3%. So I guess I think that's the situation that we are in. This is not abnormal anymore. It's already a new normal or normal in America, in Europe, in Japan, for example. The central bank has started to provide all these credit facilities, liquidity for the banks to lend out to corporate. So I think overall, there are many ways to skin the cat. There will be various channels to make sure that the economy does not suffer from a liquidity crunch, unnecessary tightness in credit. Because we all know that if that happens, that's a kind of recipe for what you call a recession, so to speak. And I think Bank Negara is mindful of that.
Great to hear that. Bank Negara has sort of jumped from the firefighting now to more long-term, mid-term to long-term views, which is quite great. Okay, so as we don't have much more questions coming in, so we're going to slowly wind down this session. So some of the takeaways that I'm seeing and hearing from what you're saying, and from the internationals engagement with our members, what we are seeing is that the recovery issue will certainly be there. It's not doom and gloom, except for certain things, certain areas where, like for example, Sabah State is very dependent on a tourism industry. So maybe it is an opportune time for restructuring their policies on diversifying their economy in that way, right? As to the peninsular side, in terms of weathering the storm, I think a lot of our businesses have already sort of optimized and corrected themselves way before the MCO started as a result of the China trade war. So that's why most of them are able to do a bit of belt tightening and moving forward. And now with the RMCO and hopefully the lifting of the MCO by this week or next week, things will just get back to normal. In terms of job losses, maybe it's not exactly doom again, because a lot of them have moved to the informal economy. And as you have already mentioned, there's a lot of the micro SMEs who have impacted very well. But from what we know in our engagements before, micro SMEs has a very good flexibility in changing their economic activity. So ability to sustain and bounce back is also quite high. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel. It's not doom and gloom, even though it's uncertain. The businesses should continue to strive. A last bit of note that you have brought up was quite interesting. It's called, you brought up sustainability and green. The International Chamber actually has got a program, which is the Prime Minister's Hibiscus Award, awards to sustainability and stuff. So the ironic part of it is during the MCO, green and sustainability has just gone out the window. Now, instead of plastic bottles and everything in the streets or in the ocean, you have the takeaway containers, and more important now, everywhere you see face masks. It's all over the road and stuff like that. So I think in pandemic or recovery stage, sustainability has taken a back time for us to revisit it, but not in immediate term, but once everything is stable. Okay. Now, just to conclude, a final summary from you, Encik Suhaimi. This would be, let's say, for business, it is something called a breaking point. Okay, do I borrow now just to see through, or too uncertain? Maybe I should start to do plan B and quit and redo something else.
Well, actually, if we look at the statistic of the banking industries in terms of loan, maybe the whole industry-wide numbers is not that great. But what I found very interesting is that the demand for working capital and the growth in working capital loan has actually increased even before MCO. Actually, it started rebounding from February onwards, and it's just continued to move up straight line. So I think that in itself also shows businesses saw the opportunity, or maybe there is a need because of the liquidity, just to manage liquidity and cash flow, then you tap onto the credit facilities. But I think in the end, the cost of credit, the cost of funds is going to stay low for quite some time. So if you haven't really go into increasing your borrowing and whatnot, there's still time. It's just you need to really have a strong case and a good reason to really I guess borrow. I mean, you have something that's really good in the making that you need the capital, and it can be justified. But the way I see it, the cost of funding will remain low for an extended period of time. So, and I think Bank Negara in particular will ensure that there's enough liquidity into the system to make sure that we don't suffer from liquidity crunch, credit crunch, excessive increase in cost of credit, like what we experienced in 98 or 2008. So I think there's just a matter of what is it, really identifying and understanding the need from your side as well as from the bank, and the banks are clear about it. And I guess it will be it's doable from that perspective. But I think the enabling environment for credit growth is there. Yeah, the enabling environment for credit growth is there.
Credit growth.
Yeah, it's not. In my opinion, it's not going to be.
It's just very good indication.
Yeah, the working capital is definitely on the rise. It's even on a sustained uptrend, even up to the latest statistic in June, which I found very interesting. Meaning, I would have thought that in itself would follow the other indicators, just collapse in April, May, only now recovering. But it actually has been on the uptrend since January, February, even before we go into MCO, even before the pandemic. It was really in full swing. So that means I think the banking system, the credit system is not impaired, so to speak, to the extent that it cannot even give loan for working capital. Yes, there might be more restriction in terms of certain sectors like property, oil and gas, because need to reevaluate, look at the outlook over the medium to longer term. But I think general working capital, which I think is largely required by SMEs in particular, those are not impaired. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, that's great. It shows also confidence from the business sector about getting in there, sustaining, just lasting, getting over the whole pandemic, and let's get on with life, right? Okay, thank you very much, Encik Suhaimi. I want to pass this session back to the chairman for MICCI in Sabah. Maybe he may give some localized Sabah point of views that he has listened through this. Is Datuk Seri Panglima online? Oh, hi. Okay, now back to you for your closing speech.
Thank you. Sean, can you hear me also?
Yes, very well.
Okay, it's very enlightening to hear what Suhaimi and from Maybank have mentioned a number of critical sectors, especially in this pandemic recovery time. from the Sabah point of view, as Sean had mentioned, that we depend a lot on tourism in a way, and also bearing in mind that the question here is very much of what should we do next, especially in the case of Sabah when this impending state election is coming in, and also with the background that the economic background that actually Sabah is the largest oil producing state in Malaysia, and in actual fact now, Sabah, the production of oil and gas in Sabah is already superseded Brunei, Darussalam. That is the latest figure. And also in the case of Sabah, we also have the largest gold mine, which is actually operated about a year ago, which actually employing almost 400 over people. Most of them, unfortunately, is from foreign workers from Indonesia. Now, what we are most people in Sabah feel is that indirectly the federal government is not doing enough actually, in helping the state of Sabah to the level that what we have been contributing to the national comfort and also to the stability of the national economy in that sense. Of course, we also the largest palm oil producer in Malaysia as well. So I think the issue here, we are in the mind of the most of the Sabah people is how the federal government, and when I say federal government, is also including the maybe the financial sectors, Bank Negara, can actually assist us, the growth of Sabah to the level that at least to the level, the national level, to a certain extent. So I hope that whatever policy the bank is planning, or whatever policy the Bank Negara is doing, I think this sector, especially this part of Malaysia, which is rather underdeveloped, and at the same time, whether it's economically or whether it's what you call socially and so on, we are very much in a dilemma, at this point of time, when we are facing the new election, and obviously this election is going to be very crucial for a stable government in the state of Sabah. And this idea of political frogging, or whatever you call it, jumping or whatever, I think it should be for the sake of the nation and for the sake of the state, it should be totally to be wiped off, the way I look at it. So hopefully, maybe this coming election, people will make a very decisive decision to what kind of government that we want, because this will be in the long term will lead to the instability of the economy of the government, especially in this stage of what you call financial crisis in terms of due to this pandemic COVID-19. And definitely COVID-19 is not going to go away not tomorrow, or maybe 1 or 2 years time, maybe even longer, nobody knows, until even the vaccine that can be found, that also have no guarantee that another similar type of COVID may come in, which is probably more detrimental to the our national economy. I think the important point here, probably the Malaysian economy should think very seriously, especially the government side, how we can actually strengthen our financial what you call comfort, the national comfort, because I think in the long term, the private sector may not be able to survive that long. And if the government funding are not enough, not sustainable enough to carry on this kind of pandemic or whatever issue that will arise in the future, that is probably maybe that should be our major concern when we do this financial planning. So maybe I've spoken too long. I just take this opportunity to thank Encik Suhaimi or Maybank for sharing it with us. And I have a very, I must say, you have presented a very well informed paper. I think it definitely helped to the private sector, especially the MICCI members. But unfortunately, I can see that there's not many MICCI members actually participated in this webinar. Maybe this is the first one that we have in Sabah. Maybe they still, getting issue how to manage with this kind of what you call gazette, which is online and so on. They are too used to of this face-to-face of meeting each other. So anyway, this is a new norm. Hopefully that more participation will come in the future, because this is not going to be the first and the last. And we have decided to have more webinar in the very near future. Once again, I'd like to thank Suhaimi Ilyas for a very insightful kind of information, and and also you have taken your time with us. And I also like to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Liu of the Maybank Sabah branch, and also Dennis Gok of Maybank Sabah branch for facilitating this webinar today. And last and not least, I also like to congratulate and thank you to Sean for a job well done to be our moderator. I think you have posted most of the very important questions, questions that have been well thought. I think that's a very good job been done. Thank you very much to everybody, especially to all the participants from whether from Peninsula or from Sabah here. Maybe in future, I hope also more Peninsula participants can participate in our webinar. I think our friend in Peninsula also must understand the situation, the scenario in Sabah and Sarawak. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much. Thank you.